My dad handed my sister the company I spent 12 years building. He told me, "You're better behind the scenes, she's the face of the family." So I walked out, joined our biggest client as a partner, and watched their company fall apart from the outside. 6 months later, he called me and said, "Soft, we messed up. Will you come back?" The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I saw them coming. "You work better in the background," my father said, handing the company I built to my sister, and in that moment, my entire future detonated. It happened last spring, a warm April day that felt anything but. The office hummed with a false sense of normalcy, but for me, the air was thick with betrayal, a suffocating weight I carried alone. When I was 23, I passed on a nearly six-figure offer from a tech giant in Austin. Instead, I stayed in my small hometown of Greenville, choosing to help my dad, Richard, expand his family business. Back then, Evergreen Realty was barely functioning, a messy stack of paper files, a prehistoric website, and a client list of 30, mostly just family friends. His office was tiny, tucked above a dry cleaner, with 2 part-time staff and an invoicing system that gave you a headache just looking at it. But I saw something there. Not just potential, but a chance to build something truly mine, alongside my family. Maybe that was naive. Or just hopeful. I'm Ethan, 35 now, and I spent 12 years turning Evergreen into a multi-million-dollar operation. And last spring, Richard gave it all to my younger sister, Sophia, with a smile, telling me I simply worked better behind the scenes. I know how that sounds. And trust me, I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't lived every agonizing second. Sophia, 3 years my junior, has always been the family's golden child. Blonde, bubbly, effortlessly photogenic. The kind of person who'd post construction site selfies captioned "checking progress," even if she'd only shown up for 5 minutes and left before the tour started. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister. Or at least, I did, back when she'd actually call me to ask how to write an invoice, or beg me to explain commercial property terms before client meetings. Back then, she knew her lane: marketing, social events, that client-facing polish. I handled the heavy lifting, operations, logistics, legal, analytics, everything that actually made the business run. I was fine being behind the scenes, until suddenly, that wasn't enough for them anymore. Growing up, Richard was the tough love type. Praise was rare, always paired with a lesson. No handouts, no emotion, especially not from his son. But Sophia? He'd sneak out of work early for her soccer games, bought her a new car at 16 for safety, and once told me, "Girls just need more support, Ethan. It's how it is." At first, I ignored it. I figured if I just worked hard enough, he'd eventually see. I didn't need cheering crowds, I just wanted his respect. So, when I turned down that tech job and told him I wanted to modernize Evergreen, he just shook my hand and said, "Don't expect a thank you. Let's see what you can do." That handshake was the start of everything. And, I realized much later, the beginning of my erasure. I started small. Digitalizing files, cleaning up the books, rebuilding the website, launching an online client portal, and forging partnerships with local contractors. I worked 70-hour weeks, took online courses in property law, and even got my broker's license to handle more deals internally. Within 3 years, we tripled our recurring contracts and landed our first 7-figure management deal with a regional medical group. Richard called it luck. I called it strategic targeting. But when Sophia graduated with a communications degree and came home looking for a job, guess who Richard said would lighten the mood around here? Suddenly, I wasn't just running operations, I was managing my sister. At first, it was okay. She had a good eye, redesigned our logo, took over Instagram, and polished up our listing packages. But within months, she was late for work, missing follow-up calls, and taking credit for ideas that were clearly mine. One time, I spent 2 weeks analyzing data for a new pricing model. She sat in on the meeting, smiled, and 2 days later, posted about her new client-centered tier system on LinkedIn. When I brought it up to Richard, he just shrugged. "She's just trying to feel valuable, Ethan. Let her have a win." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about her trying to find her place. This was about him giving her mine. It got worse. She'd accidentally forget to copy me on crucial emails, schedule meetings over mine, and charm her way into client dinners that should have been my territory. I watched her transform from helpful to entitled, from team player to company mascot. And Richard? He leaned into it. He started introducing her as our future CEO, calling her the face of Evergreen, and telling me to teach her everything you know so she can take over one day. I thought it was a joke, maybe a backhanded compliment, until one Monday morning last April. I walked into the office and saw a gold embossed plaque on her door, Sophia, Chief Executive Officer. No meeting, no discussion, no memo. I just stared, waiting for an explanation. Then Richard walked by, saw my face, and simply said, "We wanted to surprise her. She's earned it." That was the moment something inside me shattered. I didn't say anything at first. Not to him, not to her. I just walked back to my desk, closed my laptop, and sat there, heart pounding, ears ringing, chest tight, until the office emptied for lunch. Later that afternoon, I confronted him in the conference room. He didn't even flinch. "You've done incredible work," he said, "but leadership isn't just about systems and numbers. Sophia has presence, charisma. People like her. You're great at the background stuff, Ethan. But she's the one people remember." I was stunned. I asked if I was being demoted. "No, of course not," he insisted. "You'll still handle the day-to-day. You're essential, but from a branding perspective, she's the future." I couldn't believe it. I wasn't demoted. I was just invisible again. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every missed birthday, every weekend given up for contracts, every time I said we instead of I when talking about our growth. And for what? To be told I was just the guy behind the curtain, the tool, not the builder, the support act, not the show. I kept seeing that smug little plaque in my head, the way Sophia posted it on Instagram with the caption, "From baby sister to boss lady, clinking glasses, so proud to lead our family legacy." And the comments, "You deserve it, girl. Killing it. The future is female." Not one mention of the 12 years I'd poured into that company. The next morning, I drove to our largest client's office, a regional logistics firm we'd managed properties for since 2019. Mark, their CEO, was always fair, direct, honest. I told him what happened, told him I was thinking of leaving. He said something I'll never forget: "If you ever decide to jump ship, Ethan, I'd rather be the first call you make than the last to find out." I left that meeting with something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not loud, not angry, just quiet certainty. Like I'd finally remembered I had options, that I didn't have to play the loyal son forever. What happened over the next 6 months would change everything. Not just for me, but for Richard, for Sophia, and for the company they tried to run without me. But before any of that, there was one moment I still think about every day. A week after the promotion, I went to the office early to grab a few things. Sophia was already there, sitting in Richard's chair, sipping a latte, scrolling through her phone like she'd owned the place for years. When she saw me, she flashed that fake, sugary grin she used as a kid when she knew she'd won. "Morning, Ethan," she chirped. "Need help finding your seat?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt done. That was the last time I stepped foot in Evergreen Realty. And that was when the real story began. The week I left the company, I didn't say anything to anyone. No dramatic exit, no email blast, no final speech. I just quietly cleared my desk, forwarded a few critical files to the office manager, and slipped my access card into a drawer like I'd never been there. Richard didn't call. Sophia didn't text. I guess they figured I'd sulk, maybe take a week off, then come crawling back with an apology and some proposal to find a new structure that works for everyone. That's how things had always gone before. I'd raise concerns, get brushed off, retreat, then return and keep working like nothing happened, because I thought loyalty was the same thing as love. But this time felt different. Something in me had cracked wide open. And the air on the other side was clearer than I expected. I wasn't angry yet, just empty, numb. 2 days after I left, Richard posted a long, self-congratulatory update on LinkedIn titled "Passing the Torch, a Family Legacy Reinvented." He tagged Sophia, wrote about the next generation of leadership, and thanked me in a single sentence for helping set the foundation for our future. That was it. No mention of 12 years. No highlight of the deals I brought in, the systems I built, or the people I trained. Just a warm pat on the head and a line that made me sound like an intern who alphabetized files before grad school. I didn't comment. I didn't even like the post. I just took a screenshot and filed it under a new folder I made on my laptop that night, Rebuild. The next few weeks were surreal. I slept in, read books I hadn't touched in years. Spent actual time with my girlfriend, Chloe, who, bless her heart, had been quietly watching this entire mess unfold with more grace than I deserved. We cooked dinners, took walks, watched movies. She didn't press me about what came next, just sat next to me on the couch and let the silence stretch until I was ready to speak. I think that's when I realized how loud my life had been for so long. All the noise I had accepted as normal. Meetings, deadlines, Richard's constant critiques, Sophia's fake laughs echoing down the hall, the frantic pings of Slack and email and calendars overlapping like a storm of never-ending obligation. Without all that, I felt weightless, like a man returning from war and realizing he doesn't remember what peace feels like. But peace didn't last. About 3 weeks after I left, I started hearing things. Quiet murmurs from former coworkers, a dropped comment from a vendor, a couple of confused texts from clients I used to manage. The logistics firm, our biggest account, apparently hadn't heard from anyone in over a week. Lease renewals were being missed. Inspection reports were late. Invoices were wrong. At first, I chalked it up to transition chaos. Maybe they just hadn't adjusted yet. Maybe Sophia was still figuring things out. But then Mark, the CEO of that logistics firm, called me directly. "I don't want to put you in a weird spot," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "but are you still involved in our account at all?" I told him no, not since the restructuring. He paused. "Well, that explains a lot." I asked what was going on. He sighed. "Let's just say your replacement doesn't quite understand the term net absorption. I blinked. That was Commercial Real Estate 101. Are they not looping in the leasing team? There is no leasing team anymore. Sophia said she streamlined things. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Wait, she cut our leasing department? Apparently. Said she was creating a vertical marketing model, whatever that means. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the clients who'd trusted me. People I'd built years-long relationships with, now stuck under Sophia's shiny, self-branded regime. I pictured her smiling through sales calls, tossing buzzwords around like confetti while emails went unanswered and properties sat empty because she didn't know the difference between build-to-suit and spec development. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I reminded myself, over and over, that I'd walked away. That I had no responsibility to fix what they'd broken. But something in me itched. Mark's company wasn't just a big account. It was our anchor. The account that paid salaries, that attracted other clients by association. If they pulled out, it wouldn't just be a blip. It would be a bleeding wound. And part of me, the part that still remembered every late night and early morning I spent building that account from scratch, hated the idea of watching it rot under my sister's glossy incompetence. The next week, Mark invited me to lunch. He didn't dance around it. "I know you're not looking to jump back into the fire," he said, swirling the ice in his tea. "But if you ever considered starting something new, maybe boutique, maybe selective, I'd be interested in having that conversation." I stared at him. You're offering me a job? He shook his head. Not a job. A seat at the table. Partner level. I didn't say yes. Not yet. I still had loyalty rotting in my bones like mold that wouldn't shake. But I didn't say no either. Then came the final straw. About 2 months after I left, my mom, Sarah, invited me to dinner. Not unusual, she missed me, hated the tension, and always played peacekeeper. But this time, she said, your dad wants to see you, too. Just come, please. Against my better judgment, I went. The house was the same as always. A tidy, too quiet colonial on the nicer side of town, where the smell of lemon cleaner hit you before the door finished opening. Richard was in the dining room. Sophia already seated at the head of the table like she owned the place. She wore a white blazer and that same smug expression I'd seen the day she took my seat. Dinner started, civil small talk. Sarah asking about Chloe, Richard asking about the weather like we didn't live in the same zip code. I played along. I nodded, smiled, tried to find the rhythm of a family that no longer felt like mine. Then, somewhere between the second course and dessert, Richard dropped the hammer. We've been thinking, he said, setting down his fork. And we wanted to offer you a chance to come back. I blinked. Come back? Not in your old role, Sophia jumped in. Obviously, things have evolved, but we thought maybe you could consult on a project basis. We'd even pay market rate. The room went still. Consult? Market rate? They were offering to hire me, not as a partner, not even as an employee, but as a freelancer in the company I built. Are you serious? I asked. Richard shrugged. You left. We had to restructure. But there's still a place for you, Ethan, if you're willing to accept where the company's going. I looked at Sophia. She didn't flinch, just sipped her wine and waited for my answer like I was some job candidate in a second-round interview. Something broke open in my chest. 12 years. I gave them 12 years. And now they wanted to rent me like a temp with a fancy resume. I stood up quietly. My chair didn't even scrape. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice calm. But I think I've finally accepted where the company's going. Then I walked out. Sarah called after me. Sophia said something snide I didn't hear. Richard didn't move. That night I called Mark and said yes. We filed the paperwork for a new venture the next day. We called it Beacon Management, and within a month, our first 3 clients came directly from Evergreen Realty. I didn't poach them. I didn't even reach out first. They came to me quietly, respectfully, and said the same thing in different words, you were the reason we stayed. At first, I kept my distance. I didn't flaunt the growth, didn't post anything online. But then I heard Sophia was telling people I left because I couldn't handle the pressure of leadership, that I struggled with collaboration, that I'd been outpaced by innovation. So, I updated my LinkedIn, co-founder and managing partner at Beacon Management, focused on results, not titles. I didn't tag anyone, but she saw it. And the silence that followed, that was the first warning bell. They were about to fall apart. But the worst part? They didn't even see it coming. Not yet. For the first time in over a decade, I felt like I was building something that couldn't be taken away. Not a hand-me-down legacy, not a placeholder title, not a stepping stool for someone else's ego, just something mine. Beacon Management started with 1 laptop, a rented desk in a co-working space, and a mountain of skepticism from people who thought I was either crazy or bitter or both. And maybe I was, at least a little. Because you don't pour 12 years of your life into something only to watch it get handed off like a shiny accessory to your less qualified sibling and walk away without some scars. I had them. I just chose to use them like armor. The first few weeks were chaos. I barely slept. I split time between meeting with contractors, filing incorporation documents, sketching out a service structure, and navigating what I can only describe as polite hostility from vendors who were still technically tied to Evergreen, but liked me more. Some were hesitant to jump ship. Others made it clear they would the second the paperwork was clean. I didn't push anyone. I just did what I always did. I worked quietly, consistently, thoroughly. Chloe, as always, was my rock through it all. She made coffee in the mornings before her own shifts, left sticky notes with encouragement on my monitor, and never once asked why I looked so tired. She just squeezed my hand when I needed it. I think she knew what I hadn't admitted yet, that part of me still felt hollow, even as I rebuilt. Because the truth is, success doesn't erase betrayal. It just gives you somewhere else to stand while you try to heal. Mark wasn't just my first partner. He was the first person in months who looked at me like I hadn't been reduced to a background character. He looped me in on strategy meetings, introduced me as the guy who saved our real estate division, and gave me space to experiment. One of my first projects under Beacon was reworking their entire lease management pipeline. And within 2 months, we'd slashed renewal delays by 70%. Word started to spread, not loudly, not publicly, just little ripples. A broker I used to train reached out and asked if I was open to consulting. A former intern, now a property manager, direct messaged me to say, "If you're hiring, I'd love to work under you again." Even our old website designer left a message saying, "I never understood why they sidelined you. Let me know if you need anything." Still, I kept it low-key. No flashy launch parties, no billboards, just work. Because I wasn't interested in revenge, not yet. I was interested in reclaiming the part of me that had been buried under other people's ambition. Then, about 3 months in, I hit a wall. I'd just finished a 14-hour day reviewing zoning maps and tenant improvement requests when I got a message from my bank, "Your account balance is below the configured alert threshold." I checked. I had less than $400 left in my checking account. Everything, rent for the office space, legal fees, software subscriptions, hiring an assistant, had drained faster than I expected. I'd reinvested every cent Mark paid me into the business. And while invoices were out, none had been paid yet. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, suddenly aware of how quiet the office was at 2 a.m. My chest tightened. What was I doing? I'd left a 6-figure salary, walked away from a steady role, burned bridges, and for what? To prove a point? To chase some pride-soaked dream of independence? What if they were right? Richard, Sophia, everyone who ever implied I wasn't leadership material. What if I'd thrown it all away for nothing? That night, I didn't go home. I curled up on the ratty couch in the corner of the office and just stared at the ceiling tiles, letting every doubt crawl out of the corners of my mind and settle into my bones. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in it, the fear, the loneliness, the feeling of being utterly, totally alone. Chloe showed up the next morning with 2 coffees and a muffin. She took one look at me and said, "You're not allowed to make any major decisions until you shower and eat something." I laughed weakly. Then she sat beside me and said the thing that finally cracked the dam. "You didn't leave because you failed," she said. "You left because you were done being used. That's not quitting. That's self-respect." I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that until the words settled into the silence between us. She didn't ask how much money was left. Didn't question my plan. Just squeezed my hand and said, "Let's get through today. That's all you have to do." It wasn't a grand turning point, but it was the start. Later that week, 2 outstanding invoices cleared. I could breathe again. I moved a few meetings, took 1 full day off to rest. Then I got back to it. By the end of month 4, Beacon had 5 full-time clients. By month 5, we signed our first property development deal. And by month 6, we were turning a profit. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. Meanwhile, whispers about Evergreen kept trickling in. At first, it was small stuff. Rumors that Sophia had missed a key deadline, that their marketing team was being slashed, that Richard was suddenly more hands-on again. But then one of my old contacts sent me something that made my jaw tighten. An article in the local business journal titled "Shaky Ground, Legacy Firm Faces Transition Turmoil." It wasn't a hit piece, but it wasn't flattering. Buried in the second paragraph was a quote from a former client who said, "We loved working with Ethan. It hasn't been the same since he left." I didn't gloat, but I did screenshot it and save it in the same folder I'd made months ago, Rebuild. Around that same time, I went to a networking mixer, my first in nearly a year. Chloe practically shoved me out the door, saying I needed to act like a CEO, not a hermit. I wore a suit that actually fit, combed my hair, and tried to remember how to small talk without feeling like a fraud. An hour in, someone tapped me on the shoulder. "Ethan?" I turned. It was Jessica, a senior asset manager from one of our oldest institutional clients. I hadn't seen her in over a year. She smiled. "Heard a rumor you were back in the game." We chatted, caught up. She mentioned they were looking to expand into 3 new markets, but hadn't found the right management partner. Then she leaned in slightly and said, "Between you and me, we never understood why you weren't running things before." I nodded, a slow, tired kind of gratitude warming in my chest. Later that week, we inked a new deal with them. It was the biggest contract of my career. Beacon had officially outgrown its co-working desk. I leased a proper office, hired 3 new staff, built an internal portal for clients. We were becoming what I'd always dreamed of. Not a clone of Evergreen, but the company I thought Evergreen could have been if it had ever respected me. And that's when I got the call. It was a Friday, late. I was the last one in the office again, but this time, it wasn't from desperation. It was from momentum. I was sketching out projections for Q3 when my phone buzzed. "Richard." I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds before picking up. His voice was quiet. Hoarse. "Ethan?" I waited. There was a pause. Then he said the words I never thought I'd hear. "We made a mistake." I didn't move. "We." He continued, voice breaking slightly. "We need you. The business. It's not what it was. Sophia's doing her best, but I should have handled things differently." He didn't say it directly, but I could hear the panic under the surface, the cracks in the confident, untouchable man who used to make me feel small just by raising an eyebrow. "Can you come back?" He asked it like a whisper. And in that moment, every version of me collided, the loyal son, the silent partner, the broken man on the office couch, the rebuilder, the CEO. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't the end. This was the moment before the storm, the part where the prodigal son has to decide, does he return to the house that exiled him, or burn the blueprint and build something better from scratch? I looked out the window, city lights flickering below, and I finally realized I wasn't the one who lost everything. They were. I didn't call him back. Not that night, not the next day either. Something about the way he said it, "Can you come back?" didn't sit right with me. Not just because of what he was asking, but because of how he was asking. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a lifeline tossed out only after the boat had already started sinking. And I couldn't shake the image of Sophia sitting in that corner office with my title, my clients, and my systems, only to realize the ship was moving too fast for her to steer. That wasn't my problem anymore. At least, it shouldn't have been. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't think about it, about going back just for a day, just to see the panic in their eyes. Not out of pettiness, but out of justice. Maybe that's just a fancy word for revenge. But when someone rewrites your history, hands your life's work to someone who didn't earn it, and tells you to smile about it, they don't get to rewrite the ending, too. And I was ready to write my own. The next week, I went quiet. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. I needed time. I needed information. I needed leverage. So, I started listening. The first call I made was to David, one of Evergreen's old leasing agents who had quietly taken a buyout when Sophia restructured the team. He was good at what he did. Sharp, observant, and more importantly, loyal to a fault. We met for coffee in the city center, and the second I walked in, he gave me a look that said, "It's about time." "You heard they lost the Skywood contract, right?" he asked, sipping his black coffee. I blinked. "What?" "Yeah. Slipped through their fingers last month. The client said they couldn't get timely answers. I used to manage that relationship personally. Sophia replaced me with an intern. That made my stomach flip. Skywood was a $2.8 million management deal. One of our crown jewels. What else?" David didn't hesitate. "Morale's gone. Turnover's through the roof. Vendors aren't getting paid on time, so they're tacking on late fees or walking. And get this, they hired an outside PR firm to rebrand the company narrative. New logo, new tagline, full facelift." "Using what money?" He shrugged. "No idea, but word is they burned through last year's surplus by Q2. I sat back, trying to process it all. They weren't just floundering. They were hemorrhaging, and they were hiding it. Why didn't this make the news?" I asked. "Because Richard still has friends on the board of the chamber. They're trying to cover the smell, but it's seeping out. Another few months and they'll be out of cash." I didn't smile, but something deep in my chest flickered back to life. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about clarity. Because for the first time, I saw it. The empire I had built wasn't built with their foundation. It was mine. My systems, my workflows, my relationships. They inherited the house, but I took the blueprint, and I still had the master key. Over the next few weeks, I made more calls. I reconnected with 2 former analysts who had left after I did. Both quietly unhappy, both looking for a fresh start. I spoke with our old software developer who told me Sophia had replaced our custom CRM with a flashy subscription tool that looked nice but didn't integrate with half the back-end systems. "It's like putting a racing spoiler on a car with no engine," he said. "If you ever want to rebuild the old stack, I've still got the code base backed up." I met with 3 former clients who dropped Evergreen in the last year. All of them polite, all of them eager to talk. One even slid a manila folder across the table. "I didn't know who else to give this to," he said. Inside were screenshots, emails, documents, all time-stamped, all showing systemic failures, missed deadlines, and doctored performance reports from Sophia's team. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just incompetent. They were desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. The final piece fell into place one morning when I was cleaning out an old storage drive from my Evergreen days. Tucked deep in a folder labeled Legacy Docs was a file I hadn't opened in years. A full strategic operations manual I had written myself. It covered everything: client onboarding, lease escalation processes, vendor management hierarchies, compliance checklists, and performance benchmarks. The blueprint, the DNA of the entire company. I remembered printing out a copy and handing it to Richard back in year 6. I remembered the way he smiled and said, "This will keep the engine running even if you're on vacation." And then he filed it away. Now, staring at the digital version, I realized something. They were still using it. David confirmed it a few days later. They haven't changed a thing. That's the funny part. They talk about innovation, but they're still running on your playbook. That's when it hit me. They didn't steal the company. They inherited a machine they didn't know how to operate. And I was the only one who knew how it worked. That was the opportunity. But opportunity without timing is just a thought. So I waited. I didn't reach out to Richard again. I didn't respond to the LinkedIn message Sophia sent me, a generic, "Hey, would love to chat if you're free sometime," with a smiley face at the end. I just kept building Beacon quietly, carefully, strategically, until the phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. She never called me at work. Never without a reason. Her voice was strained, fragile. "Your father, he's not doing well, Ethan." My stomach tensed. "Is he sick?" "No, just worn down. The company's in trouble." He won't say it out loud, but I can see it. He's up all night. He barely eats. And Sophia. She paused. I don't think she understands how bad it is. I sat down. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "But maybe you could talk to him. Just see for yourself." I promised I'd think about it. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat in my living room, and wrote out a list. Not a to-do list, a terms list. Because if they wanted me back, it wouldn't be as a consultant. It wouldn't be under Sophia. And it sure as hell wouldn't be as an apology to her. If I went back, it would be on my terms. But then I stopped. What if I didn't go back? What if, instead of returning to fix their mess, I made sure no one else trusted them with anything important ever again? What if I did the one thing they never expected me to do? Expose the truth. I already had the data, the evidence, the testimonials. I had everything I needed to show how deep the rot went. Not through public slander, but through results. Clients talk, reputation spreads. And if you want to crush a company in our industry, you don't need a billboard. You just need to show people a better option. And I was the better option now. So I started laying the groundwork. I met with a local business podcast host and gave a quiet, humble interview about my journey, the challenges of starting over, and the importance of operational integrity. I never mentioned Evergreen by name, but anyone who knew the industry could read between the lines. I published a short white paper, "Why Real Estate Management Fails, a Case Study in Legacy Systems." I cited anonymized data, backed up every claim with verifiable trends, and ended with a simple call to action: if you're ready for a better approach, call us. And they did. One by one, the calls started coming in. Old clients, new referrals, former partners who had left the industry and were now re-entering with fresh budgets and bad memories. Beacon wasn't just growing. It was becoming a vacuum. And Evergreen? They were beginning to notice the draft. One afternoon, about 2 months into this quiet campaign, David called me with a chuckle. "You'll like this," he said. "Word on the street is they just hired a growth consultant to help reverse their revenue trends." "Anyone we know?" "Yeah. Scott Hayes." I laughed. Scott was a hack. Flashy suits, big promises, no follow-through. He used to pitch us every year at Evergreen, and I shot him down every time. "They must really be desperate," I said. "They are." "And Ethan, yeah, they're planning a merger." I sat up. "With who?" "Some boutique firm out of Chicago. Small fish. But the buyout clause is brutal. If it falls through, Evergreen loses majority stake in half their contracts." I smiled for the first time all day. This was it. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. They were gambling everything to stay afloat. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to tip the scales. Not loud, not cruel, just precise, surgical. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't sabotage. It's letting people walk into a trap they set for themselves. And when the moment came, I'd be ready with facts, with receipts, and with the calm, collected voice of someone who no longer had anything to prove, but everything to show. I closed my laptop. The setup was done. Now all that was left was the strike. It happened faster than I expected. Revenge, when done right, isn't some grand theatrical moment with fireworks and a standing ovation. It's a series of calculated dominoes, slow to line up, but devastating when tipped. And when the first one fell, it was almost quiet. Almost. Word got out that Evergreen was finalizing a merger with a mid-tier Chicago firm called Sterling Group. Sterling specialized in distressed real estate assets, and it was clear they weren't merging because they believed in Evergreen's vision. They were there for the scraps, for the bones. This wasn't a partnership. This was a soft acquisition dressed up in legacy-preserving language. What made it worse? The merger was predicated on retaining Evergreen's largest remaining clients for at least 2 more quarters. That clause alone showed how fragile they were. Sterling didn't want to inherit a sinking ship. They wanted guarantees, so I gave them none. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't call anyone up and whisper secrets. I didn't smear their name across headlines or start a smear campaign. No, I did exactly what I'd always done. I performed better. Our team at Beacon had grown to 9 people by then. We weren't flashy. We didn't spend money on expensive branding videos or sponsored gala tables like Sophia was doing. Instead, we answered emails fast. We tracked ROI with brutal precision. We onboarded vendors in half the time. We gave clients a reason to talk, and more importantly, to talk about us. And they did. Behind closed doors, over lunches, in investor meetings. I don't know what happened to Evergreen, they'd say, but Beacon, that's who we're watching now. The final strike wasn't even delivered by me. It came from a client I'd signed in March, a mid-size regional healthcare network with 15 commercial leases and 2 new development sites. They had originally been with Evergreen for over a decade. But after 6 months of Beacon handling a single test property, they moved their entire portfolio over to us. That alone was a blow. But what made it fatal? The day they pulled out was the day before Sterling was set to finalize the merger. The ink wasn't dry yet. And when Sterling's due diligence team saw the updated client retention sheet and the revenue gap that would follow, they pulled out hard. No negotiation, no counter-offer, just a single-sentence email, conditions unmet. Acquisition terms no longer viable. I found out through David, who still had friends inside the office. You should have seen her face, he said. Sophia was pacing like a wind-up toy. Your dad just sat there. Didn't say a word for once. I didn't gloat, not out loud, but I did sit on my balcony that night, a glass of scotch in hand, and breathe in the cleanest air I'd felt in years. That feeling? It wasn't pride. It wasn't vengeance. It was closure. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a blocked number. I don't usually answer those, but something told me to pick up. It was Sophia. Her voice was different. Smaller. Hi, she said. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I didn't respond. She sighed. Richard's not well. He's been staying at home. We let go of 4 staff last week. The firm's down to a skeleton crew. I stayed silent. She pushed on. I know I messed up. I know you don't owe us anything, but I need to say this. You were right about everything. The systems, the clients, the way the business actually runs. I thought I could learn on the job, but I didn't know what I didn't know. Still, I said nothing. She went quiet for a moment. Then, if there's any chance she'd consider coming back, maybe not as an employee, but as I don't know, a leader. The company's broken, Ethan, and you're the only one who knows how to fix it. It was almost surreal hearing her say it. This was the same person who once asked me if Excel was just a fancy calculator. Now she was asking for my help. I let the silence stretch before I finally answered. I did fix it, I said. 12 years ago. You broke it. There was a pause. I know. More silence. I'm not coming back, I said calmly. But I'll make you an offer. I could almost hear her sit up straighter. You'll hand over the client list. The remaining contracts, the assets, all of it. And Evergreen gets dissolved. Beacon takes over what's left. You want to buy us out? No. I'm not paying for something I built already. You'll walk away quietly. And I'll make sure your vendors get paid, your clients get serviced, your staff gets offered a job. She was quiet, processing. And Richard, she finally asked. I'll let him keep the name. He can say whatever he wants at his country club, but if either of you go public with anything that tries to rewrite this story again. I didn't have to finish the sentence. She understood. There was a long pause. Then she said, okay. We met the next week to sign the papers. It was sterile, professional. She brought a lawyer. I brought mine. Richard wasn't there. She looked tired, hollow, like the version of herself that once beamed in Instagram photos holding champagne flutes in a conference room had been quietly erased. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just signed the final document and slid it across the table. When it was over, she stood and said, I'm sorry, Ethan. For all of it. I nodded. That was all. Then I left. 3 months later, Evergreen Realty ceased operations. Beacon Management absorbed its assets, clients, and remaining staff. We expanded into a new office downtown, not huge, but clean, efficient, and bright. I built a leadership team that understood humility. We reinvested into systems that didn't need my name on every paper to function well. And for the first time, I took a vacation. Chloe and I flew to Greece. She always wanted to go. On our last night there, sitting on a quiet rooftop under a warm Mediterranean sky, she asked me what it felt like not just to win, but to finally be done. I thought about it. The years I gave, the nights I lost sleep, the betrayal, the rebuilding, the strike. Then I said, it feels like I finally remembered who I was before they tried to tell me who I wasn't. She smiled, clinked her wine glass against mine, and said the words I'd been waiting to hear for a very long time, you didn't get even, you got better. And she was right. Because revenge doesn't have to be loud to be complete. What would you have done if your entire legacy was erased with a single phrase?